son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, we are back here. This is the first Totally Legitimate Business Podcast of the new year, and I'm super grateful and excited to be sharing it with a second-time guest now. Author, historian, educator, and keeper of the mysteries, Mr. Ike Baker. Welcome back, man.
Thanks for having me. I had a blast last time I was on. Let's see what you got for me.
Well, you've been up to some like incredibly exciting stuff. You know, the last podcast was you came on like right before the book came out, and for everyone who's listening and watching, the book is called A Formless Fire by Ike Baker. One of the things I really loved about watching this book get released is I love reading the comments, right? And in this particular space of information, people are very picky and opinionated about their whatever they're reading. This book has been like critically acclaimed by some very serious people. How did that feel to like have that validation of putting this out there and then all the right people being like, yeah, this is a great book?
It felt good, you know. It certainly teased my ego, but that created more problems for me than anything else. Sure. You know, I wrote it as a guide to, and I probably mentioned this the last time I was on, but it's a guide, a reliable guide to the mysteries. The main thing is, going back and giving the historic context of where we started, at least as far as is historically verifiable, and contextualizing along the way, with each chapter being isolated as much as it can be, right? You can't totally extract the subject from the overall context, but
sure.
You know, chapter on astrology, you want to learn about the history, theory of practice of astrology as well. You go to that chapter, you can read that day. You don't have to read the rest of the book. But by the time you get through it, and there's, you know, as you know, appendixes at the back that give practical instruction for certain rituals, consecrations of salt and water, an alchemical spagyric tincture of mercury, all that kind of fun stuff. By the time you get through it, you're going to have a really good contextual basis for what this is. Now, they're called the mysteries for a reason, right? So if you are digging through this stuff intellectually and not exercising due epistemological humility, the fact that there is a point where your brain can't think about this anymore, you have to do it. That's the missing piece. The only true encounter with the mysteries is one-on-one.
Practical. Yeah.
Practical. It's an experience more than anything else. So I'm trying to orient people towards successfully, reliably having that experience. And in the past decade, 15 years, there's been this resurgence of evocation, Goetia, you know, this chthonic, demonic sort of magical tradition, and even some of the most, you know, intelligent authors and practitioners are kind of getting behind this this sort of thing as that is the basis of the Western tradition, and it's not true. People latch onto things, they latch onto ideas, they latch onto other people's work, because there's an inherent bias. And so now I've got the fancy language to back up what I was hoping was true, right? And so that has happened en masse, and it's kind of created this very murky, self-congratulatory, and what I consider ultimately wayward tradition within the Western ceremonial magic and all that. The entire worldview is corrupted because it's missing pieces, and in those missing places, people have filled those crevices, those ellipses, those gaps with their own wish fulfillment. And so I sought, you know, I started out on this project, make sure that I had everything verifiably correct, to give people the contextual basis, but also the phenomenological basis. Meaning I explain working models, theories for how something like divination by tarot works, a cosmological model for why or how astrology works, is thought to work, might work, and how that plays into the overall tradition of magic. That's what I did. So I probably will not, I'll never know if the book succeeded or not, right? Because it takes a long time often for these things to percolate and permeate and get into people's minds. But I came here basically to do battle. And I don't need to be praised for it because that it creates, but I have a publisher who very graciously decided to release it for me. This is part of the process. But it stokes the ego a little more than I'm comfortable with, but I understand that it's part of the process. But just since you brought that up, I just want to establish that at the outset. Like, I wrote this book for other people, to help them, and hopefully it does.
Well, I mean, I've loved reading through it. I'm not all the way done yet, but I've loved reading through it because it reminds me of the other compendiums of this kind of information. I just spent a bunch of time reading Secret Teachings of All Ages front to back, and there's like a reminiscence of that. It's like the new version of that. If Manly P. Hall were to update that for the common vernacular, even from the opening, I can't remember who wrote the opening, but there was a line about
Jamie Paul Lamb.
It was incredible. There was one line in there about how the purpose of this book is to make us not sound like stoner hippies or something. I don't know. It's great.
Like burnt out crystal gazing hippies.
Yeah. Dude, I love that.
That's, to me, that's my favorite part of the book, because Jamie said all sorts of stuff that I couldn't. And if I wanted to remain a reliable narrator throughout the book. But I mean, he's right to be pissed off. We're all a little pissed off.
Sure.
Because you've got academia now planting their flag in stuff we've been doing for decades.
Yeah.
And now they're like, but this is part of the profanation of the mysteries, because then people don't believe in anything. The ones that do, that work it, they're doing their best, but it's a machine.
Yeah.
These academic institutions. And so what's happening is you're pulling apart the sacred vocabulary of these, ages old symbols, and essentially you're reducing them to letters and lines on a piece of paper and putting them on a fucking t-shirt.
Right.
And that is, by definition, profanation of these symbols.
Yeah.
So, that's another group of people that I came to do battle with as well.
I can't remember where I was reading this, but this was like a while ago, and it was right around the time where all, since whatever, the 80s, 70s, metal bands have been incorporating, the generic symbols of mysteries, pentagrams, and again, profane ways without even completely understanding the context of them. Mm-hmm. But there was some point around the 2000s where all genres of music started to do this. And there was a music critic who was not to my knowledge, not somebody who was into the mysteries, but was like, I don't understand why so many people are now misappropriating these symbols. Mm-hmm. Like even a person who has no connection to this shit, is not interested in it at all, was concerned with why society is, incorporating these symbols in without even taking a fucking minute to read about them.
Yeah.
Not even taking a second to understand, like, what am I doing by putting this with a word, and what is that? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I think musicians are some of the most irresponsible fucking healthy people in the fucking world. They're self-interested, self-obsessed. I'm a musician. I was a touring musician for 15 years. Okay, I play multiple instruments. I've done national tours. So I'm not I'm speaking about my own kin, basically.
Yeah.
You know, I
Tangible-
know us.
tangible
We're
experience.
self-interested fucking nihilists who will do anything. Please God, come what may, but let me be cool. Let me be accepted. And there's this thin veneer of this kind of like, you know, very poetic, I just want to do what I love, man. Yeah, well, I mean, you've come a long fucking way from doing what you love. Okay, let's face it. I put all this stupid shit all over my fucking body when I was, profaned my temple of the spirit, essentially. For what? For what? I don't need people to know what I believe in. I don't need you to, but that's an insecurity for me to constantly broadcast what I like and what my aesthetic is. You know, Dion Fortune put it the best. She said, true spirituality requires no advertisement.
Yeah.
You know, if that's what's in here, that's what's in here. Fuck everyone else. Literally, you know. So I get where the musicians come from, but they are by and large a hopeless lot, and it's not even necessarily their own fault. It's just that we have put them on such a fucking pedestal of celebrity and exceptionalism that this allows them leverage to avoid, shirk, and, you know, dodge accountability for ultimately being shitty people. I've seen it left and fucking right. Are there exceptions to that rule? Absolutely. Sure. There's exceptions to everything. But I mean, if we're talking music and musicians here, I mean, this is one of they don't realize, like, a record label is a fucking bank. That's all it is. It's a bank that lends, they lend money to musicians, but really what they squeeze musicians. What they do is they say, these are the people that can look cool and get the disposable income from the children, their parents' money, and we're going to take it all from them and put it in our fucking coffers. Because guess what? Yeah, you had an $8,000 release party. Don't think that's free. Yeah, that's right. Coming off the top of the first couple of the first, batch of sales, the units that you move, that's coming out of your pocket. We ain't paying for your release party. Yeah,
you like those plaques on the wall? Those are $1,000 a piece.
Exactly. And so you've got these starving musicians, and the only fucking commerce they have, the only value they have is cred and image, and that's how you get in. It's gate kept, so that if you are somebody who bucks that system or will not play ball or is a little smarter than the average coming into approaching the first several gates, you ain't getting in. Yeah. You ain't getting in. It does not matter how good you are. Okay, so it's a pipeline, and so they're able to use these people to flood the collective consciousness, the subconscious space, right? Because they're using symbolism as aesthetic. They're able to not only extract money from people, but then fill their heads with inverse symbolism and do damage to them. Because in the mystery traditions, I say this in the book, and I even explain at length how it happens. The symbols are the teachings. Everything else is commentary. Okay, so now you're not only literally pulling money out of the masses, the population that's consuming this garbage, but you're now filling their head deliberately with inverse symbolism. And look around. And people say, oh, well, don't be a codger. You know, every generation has said, oh, this music is terrible. Yes. And they were all fucking right. Yeah, because it's been doing this for like 700 years, 500 years. Like that's all it is. It's just this downward slope of, and this is the Pythagoreans in particular, even Plato, who didn't have much to say about music. And I believe that this is because he understood its inherent power. Because all the Neoplatonic tradition after, and particularly the Renaissance people like Ficino especially, knew the power of music. The quality and substance of a civilization is dependent on the music because it's part of the mental diet that transcends the intellect. It enters through a back door in our heads and affects our behavior and worldview. Okay? It doesn't have to wrestle with justification. And people are in a shitty mood. They go and they listen to some music. They steep themselves in the music, the mental ambience of the mood they're already in. Well, why would you continue to do that? Why wouldn't you instead apply the opposite? If you're in a bad fucking mood, don't listen to this shit. And stupid people say, well, sometimes it's got to get out. I got news for you. It's not getting out.
Yeah,
that's not emoting.
Not doing it. Yeah.
Because you're not playing the fucking instrument.
Yeah.
Al. You're absorbing more of that dog shit mood and mentality into your head. And, we see all this, exacerbated sort of anxiety and neurodivergence. And part of me is inclined to think that a portion of that has to do with our mental diet for the last 20 years.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. I would say it's even longer than 20 years. The past 20 years have gotten exponentially worse. It's parabolic now for sure. Yeah. But it reminds me of at every generation the onset of rock music. There were people that were upset about the perversion of church songs being made into these raunchy dance songs, and it was the devil incarnate. It was going to corrupt society. And even as a kid, I could look at that and metaphorically understand what's being said. And if you look back in history, even especially through the Christian church, there are moments at which certain types of scales are not acceptable. They're demonic. We don't want to use those because it's going to affect people's brains.
See, that's, there's a little bit of kind of this fabrication there that it was never used. It was used, but the thing is they had ways of mitigating it. It was called I think it's a perfect fourth, that interval, Diabolus in Musica, the devil in music, because there's a slight dissonance. But, still within the whole tone scale and things like that. And so it was kind of used, but I think people make a slight exaggeration to make, sort of, the Christian monastics of old look like these primitive people. But they certainly didn't use the level of dissonance we have today, like we hear in black metal and shit like that. Forget the screaming, the music. The music is sonic anxiety. That's all it is. Yeah. Do you know what rock and roll means? Where that name came from? Rocking and rolling. It's a term for sex. Rock and roll means sex. You can look that up.
Perfect selling mechanism. And
so what happened is, particularly you had guys like Earl Palmer. I'm a little bit of a music historian too, because this was my life. Yeah. This was my life. I had the best fucking teachers. I went all over the world. I did some of the largest international tours that have ever existed, and up to this point. And guys like Earl Palmer in the beginning, he kind of is credited as, it might be pseudo history, but he was credited with bringing the backbeat to music. So that's that 4 on the floor and the snare on the 2 and the 4. That kind of just disco beat sort of thing. And so you get beats like that. They didn't exist at that point in popular music, but they're inserted particularly in rock and roll. That sound mimics the rhythm of sex. Boom, bat, boom. So and it's very tribal, and so obviously you have these Anglo-Europeans who are not used to this shit. They're extremely conservative, and what do we see growing directly out of rock? This rebellion predicated on sexual expression, particularly, right? That whole free love movement. It couldn't have existed without
Elvis gyrating. Yeah,
exactly. Or Chuck Berry, who was infamous for being prodigious with his seed, let's say. So all of these guys were. So it just is what it is, freewheeling, this kind of devil may care attitude. Now, it really has affected. David Bowie did an interview in the 70s with Jan Wenner, right? He was the guy that made Rolling Stone, the magazine, right? So, and he says, he's like, people say that rock and roll is the devil's music, and I'm afraid they're right. He understands, right? Because you can't be in that world and not look around and say, this is a little fucked up.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Like,
For sure. I mean, especially if you during the 60s and 70s too, like learning the more we learn of the actual history of what went on. Like now it's not necessarily as hard for someone to be as ridiculous as say Led Zeppelin was in the 70s.
Forget about Led Zeppelin, man. I mean, the fucking Beatles.
Sure. No, that's another prime example. Then
they have this like
rough
really,
boys from Liverpool. Yeah.
Well, they had a really polished kind of image though. And then you find out years later, Paul McCartney and John Lennon in interviews with Jan Wenner for Rolling Stone, talking about the hotel orgies they had with Eric Burden from the Animals. That's where John Lennon got the I am the Eggman. For some reason, Eric Burden from the Animals earned that nickname at orgies that they used to have together. So I don't even want to know anymore of what that's about. But rock and roll has a truly a disgusting history, and it's not really, it's not done the good things that people think.
No, hell no. Hell no. You know, I in New York, I worked events. I worked all the events in New York, festivals, worked with bands. Yeah. I saw behind the green door, and nothing good happens. It's not good. It's not pretty. Like it really reinforced the idea of what a show is. Yeah. The show is what's happening in front of the curtain. You don't realize all the other shit that's happening behind the curtain.
Exactly. I had friends that worked at Abco. You know, Alan and Betty Klein. Company, they managed the Rolling Stones. I was neck deep in that industry, man. I mean, I was up in New York too. My PR agent, my management was all there. And yeah, I saw behind the curtain too. And one of the most interesting things is somebody who worked in music publishing, a good friend of mine for many years. He said, the only reason people are going to hate this, but really. I love challenging you. I want to challenge you. He said, like Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, right? These are the greatest acts in the world because their management is doing its job. Because PR is doing its job. The greatest musician you have ever heard, or the greatest musician, let's say, to speak very high in poetic but admittedly hyperbolic terms, the best musicians in the world you've never heard. They're in a basement somewhere.
Yeah.
Now it's a little different because of Instagram and things like that.
Internet,
but for years, decades, this was the biggest band in the world because you drank the fucking Kool-Aid. That marketing is doing its job. I listen back to some of the bands I loved. I can't listen to it. Yeah. Especially the rock and roll, the grunge sort of stuff. And I look at it and it's like, you were a 35-year-old man when you wrote this. And the lyrics are like the diary of a 14-year-old girl. Yeah. I just can't do it anymore. I can't listen to it because I have a completely different perspective now than when I was this angsty sort of teen. And people hang on to these things for the sake of nostalgia. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's an anchor. It's weighing you change. If you want to initiate without being in an order, the first thing you got to do is start curating your mental diet. Well, the first thing is you need to become self-critical. Really, everybody likes to point at everybody else.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Exactly. This guy's the fucking problem. This group of people are the problem. But how about do this? This guy's
what if I'm the problem?
Yeah, this guy's the problem for now. Tune the rest of the world out for a very brief period. And look at all the backwards horse shit tied up knots that you've got in your head. And then become aware of that and make appropriate changes, as difficult as they are. Curate your mental diet. You want to be a different person? Shut Soundgarden off. May he rest in peace. Throw it out the fucking window. Listen to Bach. Listen to Brahms. If you don't want to go that far back, listen to the romantic composers like Camille Saint-Saëns and Eric Satie. There's a whole host of music that you can listen to that will change your interior psychocosm, that mental atmosphere. And I'm telling you, it brings you clarity. It brings you so much. It's like winning a piece of your brain back that was like, there's pieces of you in comas, that just are not stimulated, not awake, unaware. And this music can I swear this stuff, and it's demonstrably shown by science. This stuff can stimulate parts of your brain that make you begin to think more critically and have more clarity.
Yeah, for sure. I've had in the time between when you were last on, I've had a bunch of guests on here who talk about one guy who's like he's like the guy when it comes to cymatics and acoustic physics, and there's so much that suggests that, of course, light and other forms of information that we take in affect the diet, but that sound is of just crucial importance, and the right sounds. Like one of the things that he kind of went into a longer spiel on was there's this idea that maybe the sounds of nature are required for our body and our brain to like be functioning in a healthy way. And all these artificial sounds that we've surrounded ourselves with have removed all of those natural sounds that evolutionarily were important to us. And that in some way is, again, a component of the psychosis that our society is currently going through right now. But then,
it's a multi-layered onion.
Yeah, for sure. It's not, one of these things specifically. They don't exist inside of a vacuum. But the thing that has always been kind of tripping me out is like when I look back at especially a lot of the ancient sites, like the focus on them being acoustically, performing in a way acoustically. And it just can't, for me, I've never been able to get away from the fact that these folks understood that in different places in history, in different places all over the world. They understood that there's a connection between the human body and sound that is almost required for the optimal performance of the complete package, body and brain.
And let's acknowledge one thing. What about the sounds, the frequencies you're not even hearing that are affecting you at a cellular level?
Sure. Subsonics, hypersonics. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. Now let's take a brief detour. Why was music so important? Why was it such a revelation? Right? Think about, the famous story. I did a whole presentation on this at the Institute for Hermetic Studies, their annual conference. I believe it was the 6th annual 2 years ago. And I made a Chladni plate, and I used very, very fine sand to demonstrate cymatics. So, what you're doing is you're not showing the music's geometry. What you're showing is that piece of metal. You're showing its resonant frequency chain. So it's not the music that you're showing the geometry.
You're seeing the physical property of the plate.
Which is insane that if you can find a tone and make that thing vibrate at what we call its fundamental. I know that from tuning drums in studios for 15 years. There is something there. Everything has a fundamental, and that's a frequency or a tone at which it naturally vibrates sympathetically. Okay? So like a drum, if I were to get a drum and try to sit there and try and hack it and tune it, I wouldn't be able to make it sound good unless I found the fundamental. What is the natural note that the symmetry of this drum, that its construction
shape
naturally sings? Okay, so that's what you're doing with a Chladni plate, is you're showing the fundamental of this, whatever this is, a metal plate, what have you. Now, what's so cool about that is that you can change the frequency, and they're mathematically related to each other. So you're ascending this like a musical scale. It's a frequency scale that exhibits a geometric scale in the physical item, which is using sound to reveal the inherent geometry of creation. Now, or of all things, right? Because really, that
shape and form,
that geometry is really what is holding those materials together. That's what that is. It's what's making it not melt and fall into into water or evaporate. It's exhibiting this rate of vibration that this thing vibrates at to be metallic and be a 1/8 inch thick piece of steel or whatever, copper. That you're revealing the geometry through the sand and the sound. So what's really interesting there is the Pythagoreans knew this. They understood this concept, and the story that they tell, it's something of legend, but the story they tell is that Pythagoras discovered harmony. He had a monochord. Okay? So a monochord is a single string, with a bass and a bridge, right? Like a guitar, like your basic guitar is one
Violin,
string.
anything, yeah.
Right, one string. And he found that at compressing the string at certain intervals, sounds were related to each other. It pleased the brain. The fact that the brain could be pleased by this sequence of tones reveals to us we have an inherent ability to recognize products which reveal the phenomenon of order. Because that is what he found out. If I compress this thing halfway, middle way, now that's an octave. It's twice as there's a relation. It's the same sound, higher pitch. Same tone, same note, higher pitch. Right? So he realized that, wow, there's some sort of order here. And that harmony, mathematically, is equivalent to the concept of ratio.
Yeah.
So all things are ordered by this cosmic ratio. And from that, he gets this thing that in the Western mystery traditions we call the harmony of the spheres. And it's a way of talking about the inherent order, the inherent ratio, the inherent harmony of the entire cosmos. And from that, not only do we have the Western musical scales, they're based on Pythagorean mathematics and sound, but an entire mythopoetic cosmology is based off of it, about how there's 7 visible planets from the Earth and the sphere of the fixed stars, the constellations. What does that give you? It gives you an octave. So the universe to these people was an octave. And while we know that now to be not empirically, scientifically true, there is an inherent symbolic truth to that.
Yeah, for sure. Analogous to many things, and again, like we're talking about, this is like shape and form. This is how structures become a thing. There's 2 things I want to bring up. I'm loving this.
Well, one thing I just want to point out real quick, because the ultimate point I wanted to get to there was, what happens when we start preferring dissonance to harmony? What happens when, as human beings, we no longer appreciate harmony, ratio, beauty is what that is, right? They call architecture frozen music. What happens when we reject that and we embrace chaos, disorder, and dissonance?
Yeah.
Look at what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we're not saying that music is the reason for society's ails right now. We're saying it is at least a portion, at least contributes to that. We're talking a lot about cymatics, and you bring up the plate thing, and I've tried to explain this to people a bunch and show them things, but John Stuart Reid is this acoustic physics guy I had on. He's an acoustic physicist. What he does is he has this special microscope that holds a little bit of water, and he pipes frequencies into the water, and he's able to get more like a 3-dimensional cross section. So he uses water because water is without shape or form. And when he pipes vibration into it, he can get a practically 3-dimensional cymatic image.
Wow.
From like the cleanest representation of what the frequency would look like, at least running through the medium of water. I would highly recommend checking his shit out. Again, he comes to it more from a scientific perspective, doesn't really get into like the more hippie components of cymatics and frequency and vibration. But again, like I just look at a lot of these ancient sites, and this is even, before music, even a lot of Hindu temples. There's cymatic images all around it. When you realize that these temples were just monks in there chanting, and maybe they weren't making music, but they were sitting there and washing themselves in high amplitude, specific vibrations. I don't know. To me, it's like one of those things where light too is becoming more and more. I'm really battling with the fact that maybe these screens have something to do with it.
Yeah.
The fact we're staring at these screens, something about this light is like really fucking up the natural processes.
Well, they've demonstrated that causes brain damage and cancers in rats and things like that. That's you can go blue light. You can go on and look at find the abstract to some of that research is really easy to pull up.
It's I don't know. To me, I've been making this joke for like a decade now, but whenever we started using screens, touch screens, I felt like we were in a prison of screens. Mm-hmm. And every year it becomes more and more real.
Yeah, smartphone, stupid user.
Yeah, quite literally sucking all of the potential straight out of us and harvesting it for Farmville. Mm-hmm. You know, I just can't really. Music to me is like the easiest one. That's the easiest one for you to fix and control.
Well, yeah, it is.
Can we get rid of looking at screens? I don't know. If you want to exist in society, right?
You can avoid things that encourage compulsion. One last point I want to make about music is that I'm involved in certain clerical lines, ordination, priesthood, things like that. Outside of what you would consider lowercase o Orthodox Christianity. But a lot of the work early on had to do with more so studying than anything else, but also encountering it with exorcism. And one of the things universally, this is not a willy-nilly thing. This is somebody, has clerics, particularly exorcists, are well trained in being able to say, okay, it's not something you want to do. It's not something you want to touch. So it's like, go exhaust every other possibility. Have you been checked out? Do you have a history of mental illness? Are you on any medications? Are you supposed to be on it? That kind of stuff. And then finally, when it just boils down to phenomenon that is unexplainable by any other methods, then maybe there'll be an exorcism if there is some kind of very extreme situation and you're the last stop, you're the last exit off of this road. But universally, I would say one of the things that exorcists adhere to is that you play or sing yourself, if you can, the Psalms chanted. It's better to play them because there's beauty, there's harmony there. There's things. Let's just say, a demonic entity. Just entertain that idea for what it's worth. A demonic entity is essentially a form of dissonance. Things of a dissonant nature hate beauty, hate order.
Yeah.
So why you use beautiful music in a spirit of piety, in a spirit of humility and invocation of the chief orderer. Right, as we say, the grand architect of the universe in Masonry. Invoking him will, if not drive them out, make them extremely irritable. So there's that. Music is used in clerical traditions, in mystical traditions, to drive out dissonant beings with a dissonant nature.
Yeah, for me, that's... The older I get, the more I see, the more it makes sense to me. The more I witness it myself. I mean, I have absolutely gone through the periods where I was just listening to one kind of music and it was rotting my fucking brain.
Same.
And I didn't realize it until I started listening to other stuff. And definitely, coming from making metal, heavy music, I was always into melodic things. I always listened to melodic things, but it wasn't until, really quite recently, I understood the power of making melodic things, playing melodic things. Like the dissonant shit is fun because it's easy. It can be brainless because you're not really concerned about the relationships between the notes that you're playing. But when you have to start using that in combination with just the mechanics of playing your instrument, I don't know. For me, I would much rather sit down and be playing something melodic. I can chug anytime.
Yeah.
I can move chromatically up one string all day, every day. I'd rather challenge myself.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole point I was trying to make earlier with this idea that you're not getting it out.
Yeah.
You're exacerbating it. It's like anybody that's struggled with any kind of like sexual compulsion, right? You feel like, I just need to release this. I need to release this from my body. That is not a fire that is ever quenched. Perhaps momentarily, but what you're doing is you're actually long-term stoking the furnace. You're making the fire long-term bigger, and that's what you're doing with that kind of music. And I experienced, I made heavy music my whole life. You know, the thing is, I experienced it as a angsty preteen. And
as one does,
it excited me,
yeah,
right? Because hey, you know what? This is rebellious, and it kind of it has a sympathy. It has its own harmony in its dissonance. It's harmonious to the angst, the dissonance I'm feeling in me. So what happens is you follow that thread over time, and it's just making you more and more dissonant in your interior. And you say, well, I've always liked this music. Yeah, well, you started out with fucking Metallica. You know, it's not like, you know, blast beats and horrorcore and all this shit. You started out with most people start out with some sort of introduction, and then make their way to this, you know, and it has all its attendant aesthetic waiting for you. Horror movies and gore films, and all these things are related. And they're just wearing black, and this guy, and you know, they say that they're gentle people. And it's like, I don't know. I haven't experienced that. I would say that they are kind to people that are like them, and then, but there's a volatility that is just below the surface. And that's why, even experiencing that myself, it's very difficult to stay in long-term relationships with musicians. It's very difficult to even be in a band.
Yeah.
Bands don't last.
Yeah, exactly. However you define relationship, it's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then what happens to the lifestyle? No order, no harmony. There's nothing that grounds them. They're on the road 8 months of the year. They're in different places.
New people every day.
Yeah, and different friend groups and stuff. And it's just very, very difficult. You watch people. Yeah, Metallica is a great example. James Hetfield, sober for years, he goes back out on the road. He's always fucking relapsing because there's no stability, and that's what the lifestyle there is. Just excess. You know.
Yeah, it is really funny. I would always try and explain that to people. They'd be like, "Oh man, cool! You got to work that event, or you got to do that show," and I'd be like, "Dude, it's not what you think. Those people
ain't
are
glamorous.
Miserable. Those people are fucking miserable. Yeah. It's a hard life, dude. It's a real hard life. And again, like, I'm not shitting on anyone who's pursuing that life. Those are your choices to make, and of course there are exceptions. But by and large, it's a hard way to live. And when you're constantly living hard for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, that doesn't make you a super nice person. Doesn't make you a super easy to get along with person.
Well, what it is it's like, oh yeah, no, he's super chill. Yeah, he talks to 4 people for a maximum of a half hour. Otherwise he becomes anxious and irritable. You know, it's like you can't talk about anything fucking deep unless you completely agree with their underlying worldview. It's like there's a huge measure of self-deception that is allowed to persist in those communities because of this pedestal we put them on. I got news for you. Anyone can be musical. Anyone.
Yeah.
I bought a guitar and I sucked. I sucked for 10 years, but I enjoyed playing and I got good. You know, like, it's not like you just pick it up and, oh, look, I can do this. Sure, some people do that, but the overwhelming majority of musicians were horrible, and many of them are still horrible. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a nice little detour on my old life.
Well, but it's like, again, there's you live those parts of your life and you learn from them and you take the things that do work. I mean, one of the things I always talk about with my musician friends, and it's like my musician friends, my friends who are really into just playing music, they can do fucking anything. Like, they'll say tomorrow, I want to do this. And then in a year, they will have accomplished what they're trying to do. And it's because they practice discipline.
Right.
They understood themselves on their own personal journey becoming a musician. You know, if I want to become this good, I have to put in this kind of work. And after I put in that kind of work, then I can do things that I couldn't do before.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, I learned my own lessons of even I just remember some shows, like we used to play some crazy shows and like people get hurt. And I'd be like, dude, I don't this is I feel like this might be a liability. I don't want people getting hurt at my show.
Yeah, I mean, like Lamb of God had that problem, right? But
they're not the only ones, but yeah, they had a pretty bad one.
Yeah, that was a PR nightmare. But the thing is, it's being a musician can be a wonderful thing. For like you're saying, you just automatically know. First of all, I've got to enjoy this to some level, and then I can that resonates with me. It's not the inclination towards making music and being creative; it's the machine that you ultimately have to give yourself up to, bit by bit. It bites the tip of the finger first, and then after 30
death by
years,
1,000 cuts. Yeah,
exactly. So the thing is, it also, to be honest with you, my favorite musicians, mystics, and metaphysicians in general, both living and dead, were musicians first. I mean, you never not a musician, but but devoted the first half or quarter of their life to, because it allows you to think supra-rationally. You're connecting with essence because you're connecting with harmony, ratio, cosmic order of an exterior and interior nature. Like the Pythagoreans pointed out, we have this innate ability to recognize harmony even in sound. That might not sound like incredible, but it is. We take it for granted because it's innate in most people. But that is a miraculous capability that we can recognize order, and it pleases us enough to I now have to learn how to mimic this. I need to play guitar or something like rhythm is also a type of order, so because it's time. You're dividing time with rhythm. It's another type of order. And so there are many beautiful things that can come of it. But I used to tell my musician friends all the time, like, let's not pretend we're not fucking egotists. Otherwise we'd all be in some chamber orchestra playing to 20 people,
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That is true. And it's just, the past 20 years, it's put magnifying glass on it. It's like you can't just be like the artist that has a PR team that will put out pictures. You have to be a whore on all social media at all times, or else you just get lost in the fog.
Yeah, I remember when venues and booking agents started asking, well, how many? They didn't ask that, because at a certain point they'd ask how many units you moved. And how many, I remember a big part of early on in the music industry in the early 2000s, would be like keeping a notebook of how many tickets you sold at each venue and how many CDs you sold on site and how many you were able to distribute X, Y, and Z. And then they stopped asking about any of that, probably around like 2014. And they were just, maybe even earlier, 2010. And they were just basically like, what's your following?
Yeah.
How many followers do you have on Facebook? How tight are your jeans? But it's that kind of aesthetic thing was where we moved over. And I remember somebody saying something, I don't know who it was, but the guy's a teacher, and this is recent. And he said, I don't understand how people can find, and this is not me, but this teacher said wasn't understanding how people thought Drake was cool, because his music was so bad. And he had a student that told him, Drake isn't cool because his music is good. His music is good because he's cool. And that's when I knew it's over for me. I don't like this. I don't understand it. I refuse.
I'm done here
to do this. So at 30 years old, I actually was on tour, and I threw everything down. I had a series of full collapses in my life. And I was just like, this is hurting. I remember I got one of the biggest tours of my life booked. I was about to turn 30. And it was, for any musician, this would have been like,
the culmination of all the work.
And I cried. Like, not in a good way. I broke down because something inside of me was like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm destroying, like, why go out again? You know, like this is destroying my life. I'm never going to set roots. I'm never going to be who I truly am because I'm following this idea that I came up with of what is cool when I was fucking 16. And here I am, 13 years later, and I haven't examined that critically. I haven't gone back and rethought that process. Who am I now?
Yeah, no, dude, from my time in Nashville, from my time doing shows here, like there's also that thing where they say, you kind of get stuck at the age that you get famous, right? And a lot of people who have been, performing since they were kids will say like, I never feel like I'm 40, but I feel like I'm 12 years old because since 12 years old, my life hasn't been a normal life.
Exactly.
I've been told that this is what I want and this is all I know now, so I can't. It's hard for very few people can do what you did and be like, fuck this. This is not working for me. This is not a thing that is going to allow me longevity. I'm going to do something different.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of trauma because there was a lot of ego, and that had to be broken down. And there's still a lot of. I have a very strong personality, but the difference is now I use it as a tool.
Yeah.
I can apply this sort of aggressiveness when I feel like it's necessary. I understand I'm not talking just to James right now. I'm talking to James's audience. So this is a tool for me now, this persona, this ego. Whereas before it was captain of the ship. That's not the case anymore. I mean, before I do anything, whether it's a class, whether it's a ritual, whether it's a podcast that I'm hosting or I'm being on, I get on my knees and I pray, So I invoke the highest before anything. And then I behave in ways in which I am called, and I use this as an instrument. A lot of times it's a blunt force instrument, but, it's because of, I understand there's something in me that intuits who I'm speaking to beyond who I'm just like, who's on the other side of the screen,
That's a strange way to articulate it because I've always kind of felt the same way. Like my friends I'm always the person that people come to hear the shit that no one else will say to them. And it's not malicious. Like I would, if you ask me for the truth, I'll tell you the truth. And we're both going to be okay with it because it's all love here.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately that's a kindness because you're not pandering. I'm not going to pander to you because to pander to you means that in my head, there's two things going on. I want you to like me, which is inherently selfish. And two, I think you're a fucking child. Yeah. No, I don't think you're a child. I think you're a grown-up. And so people need to start speaking to each other like adults again and learning how to be spoken to like an adult.
That's honestly, I feel like that's the trickier part because I know so many people that I fucking interface with who are legitimate legal adults who will be happy to dish out criticisms to everybody else, but when one is levied against them, it's like a personal attack. And it's like, bro, exactly. in the spirit of advance, I am granting you the courtesy of you telling me what you think I need to improve on. So why can't you extend that same thing? But it's the receiving. There's also like a general infantilism that the modern culture is going through where it's like people just want to pretend like they're younger the older they get. Disney adults, like there's so many like weird things where people just can't. They want to go back to the simpler, easier times, the nostalgic childhood when it was easier than this crazy world that we live in now. But that's not the answer.
I was happy then. You were happy then because you were a fucking child. And the problem,
you had no responsibility.
The reason you're not happy now is because you never became an adult. Because what gives an adult meaning is responsibility.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's why these people are, again, thin veneer of civility that is very easily triggered, disrupted, and turns into something volatile. And this idea of people, being entrenched in their own rightness, and it comes from this idea like nobody's willing to be a fool anymore.
Yeah.
People aren't willing to be taught. They're not willing to join organizations that teach them. They're not willing to go to college. And now colleges, particularly in America, it's all about customer service.
Right.
Oh yeah. We want your fucking $20,000 to, $15,000 a year, to take, maybe more than that. So we're not going to upset you. don't go over there. We have you. We won't tell you anything you don't want to hear. Please, And it's just like pandering. I worked in the restaurant industry when I wasn't on tour. It's the same fucking thing. You got to jump over, bend over backwards for
Customers
assholes.
right. Yeah,
assholes, because they'll go across the street and spend their money there. So it's just this. We have this generation of people who just like, I'm the star of my movie. I need to be cool. I need to win. I need to be right. And it's like, guess what? That attitude is making you fucking lose again and again and again. You're just too fucking stupid to see it.
Yeah.
You got at a certain point, like that's what initiation is. I can put you through a whole fucking ritual if you're not open to. That's a catalyst. That's a catalyst, right? We're saying we want this person to be truly initiated, which is an interior experience, and it begins, right? According to the Greeks, aporia, a state of struggling with, and it has to culminate in a divestiture, a willing divestiture of formerly held identities, beliefs, things that you think you are, things that you're clinging to. And that's what you make the cosmic apology, and you say, fuck, I was wrong. You don't have to say that to a person, but you say it here.
Yeah.
And then the door opens. Life begins.
Yeah, that's the hard work. That's what people don't want to do. And again, like, to be fair, there is a component of the infrastructure of control that is around us at all times that doesn't want that. They don't want people going through the existential crises. They want people just shut up and buy, watch this show, shut up and buy. I mean, especially in America. So for me, I feel like Formless Fire, I feel like this is an important book for anyone who's interested in these subjects, but even for people who aren't, just as a form of self-analysis. Use your fucking brain. The prison of screens thing. We have this technology. Very few people use the technology. I use this shit to better my knowledge every day. I make sure that a portion of what I'm doing, staring at all these fucking screens, is benefiting me and helping me grow, whether it's through music, language, reading shit, researching stuff for an episode or a video. But, that's...
Well, we thank you for that.
Hey, listen, I'm just trying. But I think there's the other thing, too, is like, it's scary to try. And there's plenty of times where I feel like I've learned nothing. I've been doing something all day and I've learned nothing, but I don't know, man. I could get lost on that tirade. 2025 is already off to an interesting start, so I'm getting more and more concerned about the fact that people aren't. I'm actually amazed at how comfortable people are with how uncomfortable it's getting.
Have you looked at the astrology for this year yet? The astrological forecast.
I've watched a few, and it's interesting. And from day one, it's been checking the boxes.
When I was a kid, I kind of did a little prayer, and I mean, like, probably 18. And I basically said, God, the universe, whatever's up there, come what may, I just want to live an interesting life. And then later on, when I had sort of abandoned my previous trajectory, or not abandoned it, I put it down because it was broken. It was rusty, didn't work anymore.
Wasn't working, yeah.
I started really, really immersing myself in the Eastern traditions of Taoism and Chinese medicine. I went to school for that. I studied with a personal sifu, private instructor for Qigong martial arts. And I remember one of the first things that he told me was, it's sort of a curse in Chinese culture to say, may you live an interesting life. May you live in interesting times. And 2025 is, we've already lived in interesting times, but 2025 is, it's going to, I think there's a tipping point now, this year, particularly, maybe around March or April, May, where it's going to go from interesting to kind of, well, anyway, look it up if you're interested into astrology. If you're interested in astrology, yeah, don't take my word for it.
Yeah, the temperature's rising, and I this is something that I have always felt, even since I was a kid, that this was going to be a tense time. I can't describe that other than I've always felt, and I've said this to my friends for a very long time, between 2025 and 2050, there's just going to be some weird shit. There's going to be some shit that's going to change whatever we think life is, whatever lie we've been recently living.
Yeah.
And it just every day it gets closer to that. You know, for me, I don't necessarily. Okay, so there's the debate that's like, do you want to be around when the metaphoric or literal death of this society occurs? Do you want to be around for that? And I can entertain both sides. Yes, I'd want to be around to see what rebuilding that would be like. That would be exciting regardless. But then there's a part that's like, I kind of understand how that might work, and maybe it might be easier if I die in the initial blast and not have to like live through whatever that fallout is again, whatever the fallout is. I'm interested on your thoughts as we head into the next 25 years. What do you see as like the biggest problems that we face mentally, and not even like what can we do to change it, but like how does one prepare themselves for society as a whole changing? Like, we're one 9/11 away from a completely different world than the one we know. You know, I mean, we're an additional COVID scenario. We're one of those away from it being a very different world. We've gotten little tastes over the past 20 years, but there's just so many things culminating right now.
Well, again, like anything else, it has, death by 1,000 cuts. It's been that. We live in a completely different world. Now, the other day, I was walking around outside in my robe, doing the things, taking out the trash, walking the dog, all that shit. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm really not as, because I've made decent choices, I'm not as, I'm not like, I'll put it this way. I am relatively, comparatively, just as free in my life now as a man my age was when I was a kid. It's those freedoms have not been infringed yet, because I say whatever the fuck I want to whoever I want. I think that is an important value. I think that we must retain freedom of speech. We must retain it. But here's the thing. We must retain it. Doesn't matter what the law says. We must retain it. There's a certain level of martyrdom that's going to have to come with people who know what the fucking right thing is.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm not expecting to win. No, but that's not why you fight. You fight because it's the right thing to do. And the only way out is through. Or what I should say to people that are more inclined to self-work and spiritual work is that the only way out is in. So that's where we're going to have to go. But we're going to have to do that in community for as long as we can, as best as we can. And they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. This is a foxhole time.
Yeah.
So I think that you need to really firm up not get right with God. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is explore that interconnection. Explore the preconceived notions and the way that the factory installed fucking software that this shitty society has put into you from fucking birth. The factory installed software that you're trying to cram everything through and filter it through this system that is meant to take things apart, not give you a whole picture of anything. You're trying to filter all this shit through that. Get rid of that fucking software. The only way you can do that is look at you. Destroy, dismantle, dissolve your assumptions, and then go back and question. Not just what you were taught by the church, but what you were taught in school. Not just what you were taught in school, but what you were taught by the bands you listened to, and the fucking TV shows you watched, and the movies you loved, and your heroes, and the sports teams, and all this horse shit that ultimately means fucking nothing. Question all that, dissolve it, and then explore it. You said something earlier about like, oh, when I joined my first band or when I went on the road, you know, I stayed, whatever, 12, 13. They say that about alcoholism and substance abuse. People who stop smoking weed after like a lifetime, people who stop drinking, people who stop using narcotic substances and all those other classifications of illicit substances, they do have to pick up where they left off. And so I went through that. I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. Okay, I went through rehab. This is my whole process of putting the music down and prioritizing my health and my spiritual connection. And they said, we call this recovery, but really you never knew yourself. So there's nothing to fucking recover. So let's think about this whole process as discovery.
Yeah.
Who am I really? That's what we have to do. Who am I really? And explore the experience, the phenomenology of prayer. Don't try to dissect it with the mind. What does it feel like? There's something in there. There's something in there, a closeness, and, you know, even if it's a vastness and emptiness, something very hard to explain, that's fine. You know, if there's other types of you know, engagement with spirit, explore that and fuck what they're telling you. Don't worry about feeling like a fucking fool. Don't worry about things having to fit together one to one. Life is not this fucking neatly constructed puzzle. Take what you know, take what you don't know, and allow them to live side by side. The only reason that there's cognitive dissonance is because you have been taught that that cannot happen. That is life. That is experience. There's
Always
shit I
been.
get, there's shit I don't get, and they happen at the same fucking time. Who are you? Who are you to be the arbiter of fucking truth for the universally? Experience things. Dissect your bullshit. See what's there. Explore the spiritual. Explore who you are. Discover it. That's all that's left. That's all that's left. And if the time comes and you know what the right thing is to do, then you have to do that no matter how fucking scared you are.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good points there, and as you're talking, I feel like the thing that I keep thinking is like, you know, we created all this technology, and this technology provides us a way to easily fill the holes, and it in some way like took us away from religion and spirituality, but now like the corruption is so deep that people are like begging for some meaning. And so, you know, people who were, you know, completely avoiding the subjects are now desperately trying to find, like, who am I? What does this mean? What system of religion makes the most sense to me?
But that's reactionary. I have I have a ton of friends that left Masonry and the Golden Dawn, all that kind of stuff, and they like converted to Orthodoxy and they started wearing you know, head wraps and things like that. And it's like, well, this was a reaction. You know, this was it was so reactive that you didn't really get the space that you need. And I'm not saying that there can't be spiritual inspiration, and I'm not saying that people aren't led in their lives, but I'm just using this as an example, as like, don't just that, because that's the mistake we made. We thought that there was like church and science, and really they're two fucking heads on this disgusting beast.
Yeah,
you know, because they're institutions. There is no perfect institution. There never will be, because you know who makes institutions?
People.
Not God, man and women. Human beings make institutions, so they will always, no matter what the fuck they are, they will always be indelibly marked with both our highest potentials and our lowest potentials. Yeah. So that's why Thomas More called it utopia when he wrote that book. Utopia in Latin means nowhere. Okay, so it's not going to happen if you're looking for it in like, let's fix the system. That's not how that works. Okay, the system's never fixed. That's to ask for 24 hours of daylight, which means that night is meaningless, and therefore daylight is meaningless. Nothing means anything. We live in a realm of phenomenological dualism. It's real here. Otherwise, this can't exist. Good, bad, night, day, up, down. Things define each other. If you don't have an interplay of the opposites, you can't experience anything. Okay, so obviously being incarnated here, part of this, it's self-explanatory. Everything here is a spiritual analogy that is constantly this war of the opposites, with you as the mediator, your experience of that stuff, okay? Plato talks about this. It's a great place to start if you're looking for truth, because what he's going to tell you is, it ain't here. Yeah. It ain't here. Not capital T truth. It's on the other side of the veil, so to speak. And so we use these mystery systems developed out of that idea that, okay, yes, I need to exhaust my intellect to a certain degree, but ultimately what I am looking for is an encounter with the numinous and a submersion in the world beyond phenomenality. Because it's ultimately from that sort of atemporal, outside of time, it's from that realm that everything in here receives its essence and attributes. Okay, so that, and the mystery tradition is a technology. It's a system to help you have that experience. Because once you have that experience, though your entire worldview and personality are renovated from that point onward, and don't get me wrong, it's not a one and done thing. You got to keep doing it. Yeah. Because the material realm is very seductive. But once you have that experience and it renovates you, it's not like you can talk about it. It's a self-keeping secret. There's nothing you can say. It transcends words, transcends discursive reasoning. It transcends the intellectual. So that's what we got to do now. Okay, that's what, and I'm not telling everybody to go out and start bugging me to, hey, where can I join the Golden Dawn? It's not a fucking Walmart either. I can't just point you to your nearest. You got to qualify for something like that. But what I'm saying is, right, there's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Something will pop up for you if you start doing the work and make that sincere intention known to the forces at play. An avenue will open up for you, but you got to keep an open mind. It might not be what you had in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. That's definitely something I've tried to always practice myself, is like not worry about, I want to end up here. Just do what I want to do and be sincere about it. The things are, people will understand that I'm doing this. And the thing also for me too is, like, I've never wanted the artificial. Like, I only want it if it comes from a pure place. And it's the same thing with the art I consume. Like, I want to consume art from people who are approaching, like, I can't separate art from the artist. You know, if I find out that an artist I like did some sinister shit, even if their music was not dissonant in any way, I no longer want to participate in it, because the energy associated with whatever that was, for me, is just it's bad juju. You know, I don't want to touch it. I don't want to perpetuate it. But I don't even really know where I was going with that specifically. But it's one of those things where it's like, I wonder if the intention is in many ways more important than the work sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a determinative factor. So in other words, like, the intention will culminate. It will produce a specific result from that work. Now, I hear what you're saying about, wanting to just focus on what you want to do. But I think that there's a little bit of nuance there, or at least from a perspective of let's say, the Western mystery tradition at its, more interior recesses. There's a difference between a job and a vocation, right? Voca in Latin, related to boca, right, in Spanish, means, boca means mouth, but vocame means call me. Voca, call. So a vocation is something you are called to do. This outward projection of Ike it serves a very specific purpose that complicates my life to a significant degree. One that, to be honest with you, the person behind Ike would rather not have to deal with. But I feel called to do this, literally called. And this was a product of going through initiation. So there's that to consider, that maybe what you want is not always not always the same as your calling. Sure. I don't know. Maybe sometimes they are, but I want listeners to just...
No, that's a good distinction. Yeah. I again, like, I look at some of my friends. I have one buddy who one day we were sitting eating somewhere and they were like, I don't want to eat food anymore. And then for 3 years, they only drank protein. And this is a person who, like, is huge, muscular, like went to the gym the whole time. They literally created a life for themselves, subsisting on liquid.
Wow.
And it's one of those things where it's like, I always ask them, like, where's the impetus for that? Like, why did you start doing that? And they're like, I don't know. I looked at the food I was eating and I didn't want to eat it anymore. And it's like one of those things where it's like, is that like a calling? Is that like a higher spiritual thing? Like, this stuff is rotting you from the inside. Do this differently, or is it more like a more like personal, like this plane of just like I don't know. I don't know. It never ceases to amaze me what people are capable of doing when they want to do something and the intent behind it is of whatever from them pure. So, you know, I've also never had the fortune of like feeling like I've had a calling to do something. There's the things that I like doing and I just do there, and I would do them and then other opportunities would open and I just learned, my experience has shown me just pursue the things that you're into and that you can do, whether you're making money or not. Mm-hmm. And at some point it will turn into something that is useful to you in some way. Yeah. But you know, again, that's also a lot of weekends I didn't go to the bar, a lot of hours I spent reading, a lot of time I spent doing shit, fucking shit up, learning how to do a trade or a skill. That's hard stuff. And I understand that, like, it's hard for a lot of people to look at something and think about all the work they have to do and be like, man, I just don't want to do that. But do it. Start it. Nothing happens. You're never going to be, like you were saying before, very few people can pick up an instrument and shred like Yngwie. It's not going to happen. That's right. Like 0.00001%. Yeah. Most of the rest of us mortals, we're going to have to put in years. Except love the fact that you now have something to keep your interest for years and to struggle with and to try and understand whatever that is.
It's your soul's personal dance with the harmony of the universe. Yeah. So I mean, there's you don't have to fucking be on stage. You can sit in an armchair and zone out, lose time, right? For 3 hours, you find out afterwards. And you're like, oh shit, I was going to go food shop. Now the grocery store is closed. It's happened to me many times, you know, and but there's an important dance that's happening there with my soul is interacting with the harmony of the universe through sound and obviously the material that makes the sound. Yeah. And even in that, right. Maynard Keenan had a really good analogy. He said, you know, initially when they were making instruments and even still, they'd use like cat intestines. And now we use string, but it's stretched, and you got to really get that action in there, and you got to, you know, put the bridge in, and there's so much tension, and wood has to be hacked and cut down and worked, and all these parts need to be screwed or glued or shaped. There's so much violence that goes into making an instrument, the product of which is beauty most of the time, unless you're in a metal band. but you know, that's that dualism, that or the phenomenological reality of dualism is that it's just everything in this world is a good thing happens, and then several bad things happen because of that good thing, and then but ad infinitum, right?
Yeah,
and then
right.
several other good things happen
Like
because
a
of those
fractal.
bad things, and it's just this fucking fractal, situation. That's so to sit here and say we're gonna make everything perfect. You're kidding yourself, or you don't know enough about reality.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of failure, I understand, is scary for a lot of people, but I've always been excited for the failure, because failure means I'm doing something, and the failure means there's targeted room for improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Great way to put it.
I've always kind of felt that way. Now, was I always that peaceful in relaying that to myself? I could always tell that to other people, but could I tell that to myself? No. I was a little more critical about myself, but I definitely have gotten better in, the back half of my 20s about just being more cognizant about the things that I can tell other people and that I know in my heart to be true, and be hard on myself on the parts of my life where I need to be hard on myself. The other parts of my life, try and be a little more positive in your thinking. But again, it goes back to what's your diet? And my diet for at least, between 15 and 25 was putrid. Putrid music, putrid media, really depressing hopelessness. And I guess this would be the other thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about, the general malaise in society right now, and the very apparent feeling of hopelessness from our generation and the generations below us. I understand why people feel that way. And, for as dark as I'm willing to entertain any idea, I am still hopeful. I still have hope. When I wake up every day, my day has purpose and meaning. There might be a nuke later, but until that nuke comes, I'm going to be hopeful.
Well,
and
I mean,
productive.
and even when the nuke comes, you should remain hopeful. That's how you survive. But I it's something that I wrestled with as well, and I still wrestle with. But every year I have this tradition. It's in its like 9th year now. Every year, at the darkest time of the year, I watch a couple of movies that are very, very special to me. I make time for that. I'm not big on TV. I'm not big on that kind of stuff. But I make time for movies that inspire me. And one of these movies, even though there's a tremendous amount of hyper-violence in it, happens to be Lord of the Rings. I simply just do not have the time to read the trilogy of books again. I've read them like 4 or 5 times. Yeah. But there's a point in the first movie where Frodo says to Gandalf, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had ever happened. And he said, well, so do all. And Gandalf's response is, so do all, all people who live in such times wish this. And I agree with this part especially, but that is not up to us. What is up to us is to make the best with the time we have been given. Okay, so it's that, and he says in another part of the movie, there is always hope. And I have found that to be utterly true. If there's anything in this world that I could say is close to capital T truth, right? Because like what I said before, the Platonic epistemology about there not existing, capital T truth doesn't exist here. There is still truth, right? But capital T, that theory of everything, solve all your misunderstandings, that you do not find here. That's in another type of experience. But if there was anything that ever came close to that here, I would say that the idea that there is always hope because it's in you. It's in you. We as human beings have been gifted with a power of the soul that is exclusive to us for as far as that we can see, and that is the imaginal faculty. And I'm not talking about you sitting there daydreaming about your crush, your gym crush. I'm telling you, the power of your mind to picture things that have not happened. Almost nothing else that we understand can do that. There's no imagination. There is instinct, but there's no evidence for imagination to the extent that the human being possesses. Okay, this is considered a power of the soul. And so in order for you to have hope, you need to be able to envision and imagine a better future. And we have that. Everybody has that capacity. It's just you got to exercise it, and you got to pull yourself out of the depression and the malaise, because that's, there are a number of mental and physical, chemical things that are being pumped into our water, our air, our trash piles, our food.
Our food, especially, yeah.
That's a given. That affects our overall mood. We are literally living in an estrogen stew, and you're seeing that in health problems that men are having endemically, almost pandemically, in the West. And, you're also seeing that in the physical sort of you're seeing physical manifestations of that hyper sort of exposure to estrogen in young women. So it's not, but there are other things too, and you have to be aware and combat this, because there's nothing that the mind, the soul, can accomplish. You say the word soul, and people think I mean like Casper the Friendly Ghost is like Ike, except translucent. The original sort of word for soul is psyche, and this comes out of our Hellenic and Hellenistic spiritual texts that are really the textual sources for the Western esoteric traditions. And the soul was what these initiates and philosophers, that word that they used to describe the sum total of functions and experience of interiority. So your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, your imagination, your will, all of that stuff is the soul. And so that's what I mean when I say, and I believe that also to be absolutely true, phenomenologically true. I do not believe consciousness at all is an emergent property of the physical matter of the organ of the brain. I think it resides there for a time, in the same way that, Graham Hancock he probably made this analogy famous, but I'll reiterate it. When somebody dies, to think that their consciousness is gone is to think that, when you've shut your television or something like that off, that the radio signal is dead. It disappears. Yeah. So it's the same kind of, that's how they viewed the soul anciently. And the soul has powers that we have to awaken and attune to, and you don't awaken these things and experience your power as a spiritual being having a material experience by like fixing the fucking government. I don't know, going out and starting some sort of political action campaign. If anything, you're gonna fuck all that up.
Yeah, seriously.
You gotta go in. The way out is the way in.
Yeah. Yeah, so this might be a perfect segue. So in the past year or two, you've had the fortune of doing some pretty epic travels around the world, going to some pretty crazy sites, and even getting the opportunities to speak there. First of all, let me ask, like, when you started to get into these topics, did you ever think it would manifest in you being like a featured speaker, literally speaking in the halls of this shit, in the ancient sites?
No, never in a million fucking years. I mean, that would have destroyed my initiatic process, my spiritual alchemy. If that's what I had set out to do, I'm already getting on a sinking ship at that point.
Yeah.
I'll tell you exactly what happened. I destroyed my fucking life, and I had done it so bad and so many times that I literally quit my job, broke my lease, moved out of my apartment, moved back home, and I spent about 3 months wandering around the woods. And I would just read books and
complete reset.
And I remember, I didn't have a fucking penny, but I was in a liminal space. Thank God, literally, that I had a parent who was just basically like, you can live here, but you got to get on your feet, because I was struggling with addiction. So there was a little bit of grace that was given to me. But I did this reset, my entire life changed. But I remember the day that it changed. I was walking in the path that I had in the middle of the woods that I had walked. It was an 8-mile walk. I did that every single day for 3 months, round trip. And I remember saying, I don't know what I'm doing. Please, take the wheel, literally. I wasn't talking to Jesus. I wasn't talking, just saying, I don't know what I'm doing. Every time I try and take the wheel here, I fuck it up. I end up in a ditch, one way or the other. So I give up. Lead me. And from there, my entire life changed. But you got to keep engaging with that relationship, that prayerful relationship, that communication with whatever. I mean, was it the absolute? Was it God? Was it the demiurge? Was it my higher genius? The part of my spiritual architecture that transcends my ego. I tend to think that. But again, these things are the mysteries for a reason. We don't know.
Right.
But I made a sincere. That was my cosmic apology. I was wrong. I have no clue what I'm doing. And I didn't say it in front of anybody. And I didn't say it because I thought I'd get rewarded for it. I believed it. There was sincerity there that has only happened very few times in my life at that level. And it totally renovated me. And I was pushed into this by several different circumstances into talking in these communities. I didn't think that it would be so I'd be talking about the nature of reality and politics and Plato. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to make a YouTube video on what is magic? Because that's what I had been doing. I'd been doing alchemical initiation and theurgic magic. And so let's talk about this stuff. And comparatively, right, for the community and for I'm no, Justin Sledge, but it blew up, and I've had a lot of different experiences. And like I said to you before, I still say, before anything, guide me. I still don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. So, I guess first too, I mentioned it to the audience, but break down to them in the past year, you've started basically giving. Is it full on classes? Are people coming to these? Is a week long event, or just a hosting of a scenario at a sacred site to completely immerse yourself?
Well, so what has happened is, I'll put it this way: I was approached by somebody. So this is what's been going on. I got involved. I was literally approached. Because of my podcast and the videos, the documentary style presentations I do on the Arcanum channel, which are all available for free on YouTube. So there's people
Links
out there.
Links will be in the description.
Well, no, but I mean, people out there are just watching it. I have no way of keeping track who's watching it. You don't have to subscribe to watch a video. So I get people that come out of the woodwork, and I was invited to participate as a founding member of this. International conference called the New Hermopolis Conference at the time. We had to rename it because of some issues that took place later with the initial administration to the Hermopolis Symposium. But it took place in October of last year, 2024, and it took place at Dr. Mervat Abdel Nasser's New Hermopolis Eco Village.
This is the website?
Yeah. That's the thing that's on my website. So we gathered essentially some of the top scholars in the world in Egypt at this little heritage site in the middle of the desert, next to the ruins of the ancient city of Hermes, Hermopolis Magna. Literally, its backyard is the necropolis. It's just a graveyard. And we went out there almost every morning into the mountains and the hills, and we meditated, and many of us. But it was some of the world's top scholars on esotericism, but also, and this was my contribution, I brought in some of the the most prominent and serious practitioners. So we sequestered them in the desert for about a week and sort of forced them to interact with each other. And if we found out that they had a lot more in common. And we left there with a mission, really a mission statement to go out into the world and in an effort to resurrect these hermetic principles in education and in, we had Dr. Walter Hanegraaff, who is one of the biggest names, in our community. We had Dr. Charles Stang, who is the head of the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions. Dr. Shannon Grimes, Dr. Gregory Shaw provided a presentation as well. I mean, it was crazy. It was surreal. All of us out there in the desert in Egypt. We did some excursions. I presented as well, but now, I was approached after that by a company called Argos Destinations, and they asked me if I would lead, facilitate what they're calling a field immersion through Egypt. So for 9 days, that's what we're doing in Egypt in October.
That is sick.
Of this year, yeah. So it's limited to 16 participants. We're about half capacity right now. And I'm going to teach the history, theory, and most importantly, the practice of Greco-Egyptian theurgic magic, which is spiritual magic, magic for elevation. It's called Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Theurgy. We have private access to many, if not all, of these temple sites, and I'm going to be demonstrating, but also teaching these techniques to 16 participants. We also have certain retreat spaces that are privately, they're reserved for us to go and stay at and do outdoor sessions and midday sessions of learning and exchange and all that sort of stuff. And that's happening October 16th or October 18th to the 26th of this year, 2025. Registration's open for that until March 21. So you can go on my website, Ike Baker, IKEBAKER.com, and there's, more information. We have an itinerary. I even hosted a digital open house that's up on the Arcanum channel that people can watch. For an hour, I kind of just explain what we're doing. We go through the whole itinerary, the costs, the breakdown, the logistics, everything. Yesterday, I hosted a free event that was extremely well attended to sort of promote this event, but also to demonstrate some of the techniques, the history, theory, and practice that I'm going to be teaching on site in person in Egypt. And this presentation was called The Luminous Body. Okay, so I talked about the energetics, for lack of a better term. I wouldn't necessarily call it energy in the way that we think of it, right? I have a background in Chinese medicine, Qigong, and all of these sort of, quote unquote energetic therapies. I don't think it's necessarily energy, but there's no better term right now to describe this stuff. But it's real. It exists. And it's a huge part of magic and spiritual theurgy. And one of the things that I did, especially in the digital open house, but also in this class that I gave yesterday, The Luminous Body, which is going to be available on my Patreon, because I'm just giving too much shit away for free. I'm throwing all this crazy shit out there, and I'm getting no remuneration, and there's kind of an imbalance there, right? I mean, the balance is kind of, whether it's homeostasis or Sophrosini, this natural sort of balancing act, that's a natural law. So I can't just keep literally just vomiting and bleeding for people. And because if you want me to continue to do this, I have to.
There needs to be some reciprocation.
I need to at least get a cup of coffee from you. Like just a cup of coffee. Really, it's less than a cup of coffee because the coffee I get down the street is $5.25. It's $5 to join my Patreon. and then binge all my videos and unsubscribe like everybody does, the next month. So that's up there. But I'm showing how I was able to reconstruct this stuff from original texts, right? The Greek magical papyri, the fragments of the Chaldean oracles, on the mysteries by Iamblichus, which we have in its sum total, the Hermetic text, the Corpus Hermeticum. I was able to reconstruct a lot of this stuff, given my decades of work in this stuff and at least a decade of training in ceremonial theurgy in the Western tradition. I was able to reconstruct it where we can perform these techniques. And so that's what I'm going to be teaching in Egypt. And then the other big thing I did this year was I got an opportunity to give a presentation at Oxford University, which is that's surreal that, I would be welcomed at an academic institution, particularly of that caliber, to talk about theurgy and the ceremonial and magical traditions of the West. That was incredible. It was part of the Eurotas Creative Bridges Conference, and I was really, I was asked to submit an abstract for that. So, I'm a little bit like Forrest Gump, where I just happen to be in the right place at the right time. What I care about is teaching this stuff to people and getting the message out there. Obviously, if I do it and all of it is completely for free, I'm not going to be able to continue to do it for very long. It's just the reality of living in the material universe in 2024 in America. So, like I said, I'm asking for a cup of coffee, basically. That sort of remuneration helps me with the web hosting and, with literally,
all of the costs that come along with doing shit like this that people have no idea about.
And time is a non-recoupable resource. I can get money. I can't get time back. Man, it takes me 11 hours to edit a fucking 25-minute video for the documentaries I do. I'm not asking for much.
Yeah, it's also something that I struggle with too. I'm trying to get better about it, but no, come on, you gotta. I like the reciprocal thing.
Otherwise,
the most eloquent. Yeah, well, quite literally, yeah, and that might be an acceptable thing in society right now, but I don't want to participate in that. I'm sure you don't want to participate in that either. So
no, and it's it is discouraging to see that people. I also host these $15 along with the free stuff I do. I have a $15 rolling lecture. You can come every single month. I have links. We're working through the 12 Platonic dialogues that were the curriculum, the prerequisite curriculum for theurgy in the school of Iamblichus and onward in the Platonic Academy. And I'm working through that, and we're reading it together. And, it's $15 a month to join us for an hour and a half Zoom call with a Q&A at the end. And so there's that stuff too. And it's a relatively low turnout compared to the free class I gave yesterday. It was totally free. I think at one point we had 70 something people show up, and it's just what's going through people's heads? I get it, but it was the same thing when I worked in a restaurant. I worked in, like I said before, if you can't tip, don't go out to eat.
Yeah, right.
Don't go out to eat. Cook your fucking eggs.
Cook your own food.
We need to survive. We can't just bleed for you.
Well, that's a great way of putting it, but some people just don't mind the bloodshed, I guess.
They don't look at the humanity. They look at what I can get for fucking free. They don't look at the humanity behind this person who's taking time and years of their experience and, like you said, failure and error and giving it to you in an hour presentation. At that point, it's just get fucked. If you want everything for free, you want everything, then you don't deserve. Yeah, you don't 100%. Deserve the mysteries.
Yeah, 100%. This is a silly analogy, but there was a point at which in my audio engineering trajectory where cracked plugins weren't doing it for me anymore. And there was a point in my life where I was like, you know what? If I want to take myself seriously about this, I'll buy the fucking plugin. If I really think this is a thing that's going to help me advance my agenda, whatever it is, I'll put my money where my mouth is. Yeah. And ever since those times, I've tried to, even when it comes to like, I don't really buy music anymore. What I will buy is a tangible thing that a band that I'm interested in puts out. That to me, because I know that money is going directly to continue funding whatever that is. It's not getting siphoned off by some asshole in a C-suite somewhere.
Yeah. And just for anybody that's interested in taking classes on like magic and theurgy and wants them for free or for cheap, if you can't afford to pay this stuff, you got a lot of shit you got to work on before you want to become a magician, a ceremonialist. You want to start working in spiritual areas. You got to fix your fucking life to the point where you can give that reciprocal balance, obey, and participate in that natural law of take, but also give. Because a lot of people nowadays, this bullshit Gaia spirituality, a lot of people think that they're just going to fucking find the answer and it's going to fix their life, right? If anything, the initiatory process will force you to redress the balances on your fucking life's ledger. You got to fix that shit first. And when you come knocking at the door of the mysteries, something takes you by the head and sticks your face in the pile of shit that you have created. You got to fix this now. Before you can move on to the big boy stuff, you got to fix the little boy problems, right? So I would offer that to people who don't feel like this stuff is worth paying $5 to $15.
No, that 100%. And most of that shit is work that you have to do, and it's free. All the work that you're going to need to do, all the information you could need, you could find that very easily. It's just the hardship of, critically looking at yourself and your behavior and making the hard choices to break habits and form new ones. I have been a person who's always enjoyed doing that, who's always enjoyed learning and growing, and I understand why people don't, but at some point it's no excuse. And especially in the world that we live in now, where there's quite literally a battle for our mind, it's like, it's a requirement. You have to be doing, every day you got to be doing this. And this is like, I'm somebody who's been interested in these things for a long time. I'm not there yet. Every day I find some new thing I need to fix about myself. And I probably will until the day that I die. Don't be afraid of those things. Don't be afraid of looking inside yourself and facing the shortcomings that ultimately there's shortcomings.
Yeah, but I mean, and people would say like, oh, okay, so then is this stuff psychology? Well, yeah, I mean, some of it. Sure. But that's not all it is. You know what I'm saying? It's like, just because I'm like, right now I'm looking at this side of the coin doesn't mean that the other side isn't there with it. There's no physical action that doesn't have a spiritual consequence, and vice versa. So, but the point is, the reason why I focus on this stuff is because, like, you're not at the, to whoever's out there, you're not at the inner door of the sanctuary. You're at the outer door. So you need to work on like I say, the little person, the young. The baby problems. You got to learn how to crawl first.
Like that, yeah.
You want to walk. You want to sprint. You want to become this, this talking head or this magus.
Who can wipe their own ass. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What do you make yourself dinner? How about that? Start there.
I want to make sure I talk about this before we go. But so being at Oxford, being at these sites in Egypt, like, I remember even seeing when you were at Oxford, you were holding some pretty arcane texts. And I'm wondering, like, what is the emotional, for somebody who's super into these topics, to be in the places where some of this stuff occurs, to hold the books that encapsulate, the knowledge that you have now spent so much time looking into and researching it. Like, what, is there a particular, like, fulfillment moment where you're like, yeah, damn, I didn't even know that I wanted to be at this moment right now, but I am so happy that I am here. I'm holding this book. I can't believe I'm in this physical space right now, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah. So one of the things that actually happened completely by accident was I was in Freemasons Hall just wandering around. I was actually trying to find my way to Temple Church, and I ended up seeing a building. I know this building. I've seen it a million times. And then, I found the door and like, the archway, and I was like, this is Freemasons Hall. Like, I can go in here. Anyone can go in here. So I just kind of walked around and kicked rocks for a little while, and I hear this voice, and I'm like, I know that voice. And this is in London, and I turn around and I see this guy, very, very sharply dressed, blue jacket, blue fedora. And I'm like, I don't think that is who I think it is, because I don't know him to be such a well-dressed gentleman, because I've only ever seen him on Zoom. But it ended up being somebody, a brother, a brother Mason that I had worked with on the internet for a series of lectures. And I ran over and I hugged him, and we took pictures together, and he got me signed up as an official researcher. With access to the libraries there of the material. Yeah, and so then I was told, hey, you can go also to the British Library and sign up as a researcher there. And I did that. It's completely like I'm telling you, like my life is like Forrest Gump. I just happen to be in this fucking place, and this thing happens. I didn't ask him to make me a researcher. He's like, let's get you signed up. You're here. I can facilitate this for you. So, I was able to hold in my hands the Sloan manuscripts, which are, contain the actual physical writings of the angelic sessions of Dr. John Dee in his own hand, his journals. And I had recently, this is a big part of the Golden Dawn tradition. It's a big part of the occult tradition.
Sure. Yeah.
And, I was in awe that I ended up here. I was grateful that I ended up here somehow. But then the other side of the coin is I was trying to figure out why I was put in this situation at this time. Because as you can tell, very little agency on my own part. I just kind of put one foot in front of the other, and the road unfolds. It doesn't unfold unless you walk a little. Yeah. But it just happened. So I'm sitting there trying to think, like, what do I got to know about this? So I took about 100 pictures of it, and there's some things that have come to light, but the main thing is that I'm going back to London. I've got a new book coming out. It's called Etheric Magic. It's a practical system of energy-based, energy work magic, like using the luminous body, using the ether, the quintessence in our material universe. It's not just an analogy. There is a substance here that people like Eliphas Levi and even, the Greek Neoplatonists like Iamblichus, Proclus, all these guys way back. It's not a new agey idea. There is a luminosity that accompanies our physical organism, interpenetrates it, and this is the agent of magic. You learn how to connect to this and move this and incorporate this. You can do magic. And not until then. You're always working with it in some degree, right? Because everything spiritual, quote unquote, that we can interact with in a physical body is essentially just some form of intelligence that exists in this luminous substrate.
Yeah.
And we don't, when we call forth an angel or whoever's out there calling demons, they appear to us, but they appear to us in the mind's eye, and they use these essentially just images. They don't have bodies. That's not what they are. It's this intelligence that exists in this all-permeating substrate of luminosity that I hesitate to call energy, but there's really no better term for it, so I use ether. So Etheric Magic is a book on how to integrate this stuff, connect with it, use it for the purposes of theurgy and magic and health and things like this. And I've made it Western, because this is not well codified in the Western traditions. In the East it is, pranayama, qigong, etc. But I learned all that stuff. I became, very, very adept at that kind of work. And then I was able to, again, reconstruct the Western system using the languages and symbol systems of alchemy and the Kabbalah for people to use it. So I'm going to be in London at Watkins Bookstore, which is a great privilege, to give a presentation on this book. That's going to be April 24th of this year. And so I'm going to be there also utilizing my new researcher status there to really go through the records and the archives and research for another book. And I'm not going to get into what I'm researching or what that book is going to be about right now, because there's enough out there for people to check out. But I'll be spending about a week there doing research in April to kind of put together a book that I think needs to be written.
So when you become like a researcher of either of these places, do they give you like a list of the manuscripts that they have, or is just like that allows you to get into the door so that you can look through the archives and pull whatever you want? How does that work?
So typically, you can't enter any of the spaces where the books are, or the manuscripts are actually held. You can't access them without that card. But here's the thing. These places, I mean, the British Library, the British Museum, all that, they've got records from all over the world, right? I mean, sure. Like, I used to go to museums in Athens, and I would see these beautiful busts, and then I'd read the little card, and it says, reproduction. Original in the British Museum.
Oxford. Yeah, exactly.
Because they took everything. So there's tons of shit in London from all over the world. So what you got to do is there's a time frame. You need to give these people at least whatever it is, 48 hours, 72 hours to pull these things. And so to that effect, you can use your researcher number to access their online catalog and then request a date for them to have this ready for you by. And there's a certain amount of hours where you can go in there, go to the counter and say, hey, here's my researcher card, and also these are the manuscripts I requested. And they will provide them to you. And then you go and you take them, you take photos, and as long as it's not flash photography. Some of them you have to
white glove.
Some of them, the really, really old stuff that they didn't make me wear gloves to handle the Sloan manuscripts, because they said the construction, the constituents of paper back then is even more durable than our paper now. So they're like, it's nuts, not. Dude. Yeah, you're not gonna fuck that up.
I guess it was more like cloth. It was probably more like a cloth than it was a paper.
It is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It is. You can see the weave. There's much more tooth. But
and they keep them in a humidity, temperature controlled environment. So
yeah, I'm sure something like that goes. That I'm unaware of, but I do know that some of them you have to wear gloves for. Others you don't. So that's really how that works once you become a researcher. So I'll go onto the online catalogs, view all I know what I'm looking for. So I'll type in the names or the dates and the keywords, all of the records, in a word search of related to that stuff will come up, and then I can kind of peruse them and then ask them to be pulled, so that I'll get there and they'll already have them set aside on a desk for me.
That is so crazy and sick. Like, in terms of somebody who's trying to do research of these things, is like, the only other repository that you'd want is the Vatican. I can't even think of another existing library that would have that much shit. I don't know. That's got to be crazy. So in terms of, obviously you're going to be doing a lot of research for this new book, but are there any books that you want to look at just to say, like, fuck, I can hold this? I can be in the same room as this book?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I try not to be too precious about this stuff, but I will say, holding the Sloan manuscripts, the actual
that must have been crazy.
The paper that John Dee wrote this. It's not a photocopy. It's not like this is the paper. That's it. It for me, it's more so than I'm saying, like, literally awesome. I was the first way I described it to you was like I was in awe. It's almost like a state of disbelief and shock, right? Because it's a surreal experience that I have studied the angelic sessions, Enochian, that angelical magic is a huge part of the Golden Dawn. And somehow being in this tradition, being in the stream, he lived in the 1500s, and this connects us. He held this in his hands. I now hold this in my hands. And, I honor him in some way communing respectfully with it, treating the material respectfully, and you trying to figure out what do I need, what is required of me in this encounter. A lot of times you can't see. It's only hindsight that you can look back and say, that's why I ended up there that day. But again, it's just about making that connection, that spiritual, prayerful connection through many years and through great intense effort, that you, as far, maybe it's the type of ego that I have, but I think, like, my experience has been that I never get the full picture until it's done. And I think that's a good thing, because people who get or think they get the full picture, like they channeled something, and they go write fucking books about it. And they go and they're doing YouTube about it, and they're giving speeches. Like, channeled material is not for the fucking world. It's for you. The books I write have nothing to do with anything I've channeled. Okay? Yeah. It's nothing. Nothing to do with that. That's why I get to speak at Oxford, because people consider me an academic. But this is because it's the only reasonable way to approach talking about this stuff at this point. I'm a believer, and I experience it, and I impart a lot of my insight and techniques and experiences to people. But I'm not going to tell you, like, the most intimate experience I ever had and, talk about my fucking download. No, that's for me.
You.
That's for me. So, but if people did get the full picture, I have a feeling that they would destroy it. They would no longer be about the job. It would be about you. Who's doing it? And I get this great thing, and the world's going to change in this way, and this is what's going to happen. It's like people's egos are too fragile and erratic to be able to get the full picture. So what I do is I just put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
If I get a feeling like go in there, I go in there. I'm not asking, but now I'm at this point where I'm holding these documents, and I'm like, there's this kind of awe that I'm in, that, like, how did this happen? For what reason?
Well, but see, those are the moments. Like, I think back to the times where I've had similar experiences, and those are the moments where, like, the brief, fleeting moments where it's like, everything is right. Everything is right where it should be. I'm exactly where I should be right now. This, I don't need to explain this to anybody. To me, this is relevant. And, for me, the most comparable thing to anything like that is going to the Huntington Library, which I used to do almost every time I went to LA. But they've got a private collection. I can't remember if it's the Huntington family or whoever, his private collection of books. And they're like, it's ridiculous. His library was ridiculous. He's got first editions from Kepler, Isaac Newton, like ridiculous shit. And Descartes. And I had never been to the library portion, and I was just walking around, and then I noticed that most of the books that were out were hyper specific to me, stuff that I had been looking into, open to the page that I would get stuck on, and again, it's not anything, the things that are revealed to me in that moment, it's not even relevant to anyone else, but just the being in the same room as these things is like, wow, I spent so much of my time looking into these subjects, and I have somehow mistakenly found myself literally in a room full of the idols, the icons, of those things. I don't know. To me, there's a portion of all of these topics where I just wanted to read old books, and all the stuff that has come from that has just been like, I can't tell you how many times I've picked up a book thinking it's not going to hold any significance to me, reading 50, 100 pages, and then stumbling on some shit that is hyper relevant, that becomes something that I think about and ruminate on for years after I've read it.
Yeah. I used to have, that's kind of that's how, like, convenience ruins these types of things. Or maybe it's just switching to a new modality, a new way of operating. But I would go, to a bookstore, a used bookstore most of the time, because that's where you get the really good sort of occult metaphysical stuff.
Sure.
Barnes & Noble actually used to carry a decent selection early 2000s. It's all horse shit now. But you know what? Let me take that back because they're gonna have my book come April.
For the exception of one, yeah, you know.
They're a fine bookseller. But you know, and books would jump off the shelf at me, and they're the things that like I wouldn't even anticipate.
Sure.
And now with Amazon, that like doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it can be that is like the give and take of all this stuff. So unfortunately, I also am at a stage where like I'm writing and researching, and so most of my reading comes from primary texts where they are translated, and you know, academic texts which cost an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
$300, $400 for a text that, you know, I can't afford that stuff, but that's what I have to get if I'm writing and researching. I can't like, you know, I can't use like, Mama Tabby's book of crystal healing. I can't use that. I don't want to use it, but I couldn't use something like that where it's like Drunvalo Melchizedek and the flower of life. Like
egregious offender. Yeah.
You know? Like that's somebody from like the 70s or 80s that like again channeled this mysterious material, and now you've got entire
infrastructures. Yeah, it's really weird.
You got entire programs of people. I remember so Merkava, right? Merkava mysticism is a type of Jewish Hebrew theurgic mysticism that we have on the textual records in what's called the Hekaloth literature, dating to the 2nd century CE. Okay, this is a like Talmudic period literature, and then the brilliant scholar of Judaic studies in the 20th century, Gershom Shalem, he discovered a text called the Maaseh Merkava, the work of the chariot, and he published all this beautiful theurgic mystical literature that's in the Western esoteric traditions. And some fucking idiot in the 80s says, well, it's this tetrahedronal thing, and it's a spaceship, and you build it with geometry in your mind. And now everybody's just like, I go online to search Merkava, and I get some fucking weirdo who's like 100%. Burnt out, stoned out of his mind, talking about some, you know, it's like, this is what's going on. They're poisoning the fucking well water. You know, like it's garbage. So what I'm trying to do with my work is fight that. Now, I don't think I have no illusions of winning any sort of fight. But if there's a fucking accident up ahead, the bridge is out. I can't be the guy there on his phone watching the cars crash. I got to be the guy that's like flagging people down. Detour. You know.
Yeah, you know, you brought it up a couple times, but dude, the Gaia, it's getting out of control. It's basically the fucking History Channel now. Yeah, and you know, that could be a whole other similar tirade, in particular with the subjects that they cover. Yeah. There's some overlap, but you know, you're doing the Lord's work, literally, figuratively, metaphorically, however we want to look at it. Wow. You're really doing the Lord's work, and again, like
there's no proof of that.
Well, you know, as somebody like most of the time for you know the past 20 years, the before I really got into the Masonic channels, the only ways I would find out about any of this shit is those are like, they sell the most salacious thing and it's attractive and sexy and people gravitate toward it. But this is the real shit. This is a more reasonable interpretation of any of those subjects or circumstances than any of those fucking nutsos on Gaia I want to talk about.
Well, that I address that in the introduction where I say, okay, listen, you know, and the Platonic dialogues do this, right? They bring up sophistry constantly so that they can contrast it against philosophy and say, okay, this group of behaviors and thoughts and arguments, that's sophistry. That's rhetoric. That's not seeking truth. It's seeking material gain, prestige, power, etc. And it's using this method that appears to be philosophical, but the philosopher does X, Y, and Z, and this is how they're different. So I started the book out with an introduction that basically is, this is what the Western esoteric traditions are, and this is what they're not. And so I go through sequentially what is not? Like, why Drunvala Melchizedek is not in there? Why this whole fucking starseed thing that started in the 70s has nothing to do with reality? Why? Because what's going on is that people, right? I forget the full Latin. Mundus something, maybe Mundus Volus Ducepi or something like that. But the world invites deception. Right? Somebody asked me that, what do you think's the main thing blocking people? And the first thing that came to my head, they don't want to know.
Yeah.
People don't want to they want to go further into the fantasy. And that is what these, like, salacious or outrageous or airheaded things are, right? Since the 1950s, when we started coming up with this idea that we could go to outer space, everything's taken this fucking, like, sci-fi turn. None of that existed before, like, we started thinking about NASA and space travel, and Philip K. Dick came in the 70s and just blew everybody's head open with his incredible imaginings. Arthur C. Clarke, then Kubrick adapting Arthur C. Clarke's work for 2001: A Space Odyssey and all that. It's great. It's great entertainment. It makes you think, but this is not... What it is it encourages people towards literalism. Oh, they're not spiritual entities. They're fucking aliens. They're flesh and blood like us, but they're reptiles from another. And what's going is to constantly sort of, you mix that with, like, heavy usage of cannabinoids and hallucinogens over long periods of time. And you get, what do? You get, poof, the Gaia channel. So it's like one of these things where it's literally, it's bringing us, and I think by design, it's bringing us towards what I like to think of as spiritual psychosis.
Yeah.
True spirituality makes you powerful. This shit makes you check out from fucking reality. Okay,
Yeah.
Why? Why is that good for people who are on top? Because you're not going to oppose them. You're not going to, because it's all good, man. It's just what's going to be is going to be. And, they're all reptiles anyway. That's not on their fucking agenda for you to say, this is horse shit. I'm not drinking from the poison well, and I'm coming after you in whatever way I possibly can to fight the tyranny. So it's because that's real. That's not a conspiracy theory. People in power want more power. People in power will never give up their power willingly.
History shows us this again and again. Yeah.
Human experience.
Yeah. 100%.
Human experience. So it's that's something that's there. So I worked. That's another reason, why I wrote the book. So people, look, if you're a new Mason, you're the youngest entered apprentice, and so to speak, and you want to learn about this stuff, read the book. Don't worry about going to this sort of like escapist sci-fi land of spirit. There's a textual tradition that is our birthright, that exists, that's been around for thousands of years, and you got to read it yourself. You got to understand it. You need the real context of somebody who's a long time and very profoundly involved member of the modern continuation of those systems. Not somebody who's going to try and tell you, that, I don't know, Plato was an alien or something. Just it is that history channel sort of pseudo intellectualism and that kind of stuff that is, it's really taking us quite far off the path of what the initiatic traditions are really about.
Well, I could not agree with that more. And again, I thank you for doing your work. Again, I'm so happy that I stumbled across your stuff on the internet, because it's just, for so long, I've tried to find the person who's going to approach this from a reasonable perspective. And I love your content, man. I appreciate you coming on the show again. I want to give you just a couple minutes to give your shout outs to everywhere everyone can check out your stuff. I, of course, will include all those links in the description of the video. But yeah, again, the book is A Formless Fire by Ike Baker. Ike, let the people know what you want them to know.
Sure. Amazon gives us pennies on the dollar, and I work with some great Masonic publishers on that book. They edited it, and they gave me the opportunity. They invited me to write that book for their company, Tria Prima Press.
Tria Prima, right.
Out of Phoenix, Arizona. So buy from their website, triaprimapress.com, so that everyone involved can be remunerated modestly for their time, and so that Jeff Bezos doesn't capitalize and just literally
siphon more.
Right? It's like that scene from There Will Be Blood. Drainage, Eli, my boy. Drainage. I drink your milkshake. Now, thanks to fucking Spotify and Amazon, now I understand that. It seemed crazy to me, but yeah, they're drinking my milkshake, these middlemen. So, please buy from their website if you're going to buy triaprimapress.com, A Formless Fire, okay? Now, other than that, thank you so much, James, for having me on. I love the work that you're doing. I love the guests that you're having on, and the continual improvement and reliability of the content on this show. So it's a pleasure to speak with you, and I'll come back on to discuss anything anytime you want. Thanks, everybody, for listening and for understanding and, my perspective and understanding that I'm here to challenge people. I'm not here to make friends. I got enough of them, but ultimately I want to help you. I want to help everybody, and I'm doing that in the way in which I am continually called to do. And when those marching orders change, so will I. So now, other than that, if you're interested in participating in any lectures or any of the free content that you can consume, I have hundreds of hours of free content, hundreds of hours. And that's, you can get all of that stuff, or think about coming to the Egypt trip, learning directly from me, if you're interested in this stuff. And you want to have that literally once-in-a-lifetime experience, a field immersion in theurgic spirituality, operative spirituality, on site in the temple places in the sacred temples of Egypt. All of this stuff, all of it is available at ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER. And on that website, there's a form. You want to reach out to me, you want to ask me questions, you can. Now, do I want you to reach out and call me a horrible asshole? No. But I want you to have that right. So, freedom of speech, gang. Full circle.
This one of the reasons I love your content is because I like things that are kind but not nice. And it wasn't until very recently that somebody said that to me, and my wife actually, somebody said it to her, and then she said it to me, and it made my whole existence make sense. I'm not here to be nice.
Right.
I'm here but I will be kind.
Right.
And that's the general vibe that I get from your teaching style, and that's why I love it. I've always loved that presentation. There are a few people that I worked with in the music business who kind of felt the same way. Like, they weren't nice, but goddamn, they were kind, and I learned a lot. So the reason I like showcasing you and what you do on here is because I find it to be valuable personally, but I know to other people, I don't want nice shit. No, I don't want.
No, because you're lying to me.
Right. This world isn't nice. I would rather have an uncomfortable truth than an uncomfortable lie. And the people that are willing to make that sacrifice for me, I want to help them continue to do that on a bigger scale. So,
right. And
anything I can do to assist there. And of course, we'll have you back on here once the new book comes out and you've got some more crazy adventures to tell us about. But that's it, folks. Yeah. Oh, come on. It's just going to get weirder from here. I can already sense it.
Yeah.
Everyone, Ike Baker, please check out the links in the description below. This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business, or add us on TikTok at TLBpod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.